Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be going through the 10 best albums, the 10 best prog albums. I'm sorry, I forgot the word prog there, didn't I? The 10 best prog albums from 1976. Very exciting. 76 was a strange year for prog, wasn't it? Because prog reaches its peak 72, 73, and then prog starts to go into a sort of a little bit of a what we doing now, you know, what's going to do. We can't do more than we've done. What do? You know, and then disco's coming in now, punk's coming in, and we're not quite there in 76, but you know, it's the masterpieces aren't there like it was a couple of years before, but there's some incredible albums. Now, what's promoting me to do this is Scott Lady, or as I like to call him, Scott Dude Looks Like a Lady, from the Prog Corner, bemoaned the fact that I didn't talk that much about prog on Rick Beato, and it got me thinking. I thought, yeah, I have in recent times sort of forgotten about the prog, and I thought I need to return to the prog, so I'm returning today. And I've decided to come up with a series this month which is going to be called Prognostifications. It's a long word, but it's clever, because it's basically I'm going to be concentrating on prog again and getting back into prog, and I'll be thinking about prog and talking about it, but we'll also be doing some top tens, you know. I don't know what that's going to do for the views, but you know, obviously if you're watching this and you're not subscribed, subscribe now, you know, join all the clubs, support me, because if you want prog, you've got to support me. If you're watching my channel and going, Andy's not doing enough prog, is he? You know, but you're not subscribed, you've got no right to even think it. So we're going to be going through the albums now. To save myself a little bit of time, I'm going to introduce a new idea. Is the albums will appear here in this space. That's why I'm slightly over to the side, you know. If anyone who's watched my channel will know I'm a little bit like the Bertolt Brecht of YouTubing, because I do tell you the sort of inner machinations of the channel and what I'm trying to do. So you can sort of join in and see what I'm... anyway... You can't join in, but you'll at least see what I'm trying to do. I think I can see what Andy's trying to do there. It hasn't worked, but at least he's tried. So when an album appears here, normally I like to go to Pixabay and get a free sample of some sort of fanfare or maybe a harp strum, and it just puts it in. But it's a bloody lot of work sticking that in. So what I've done is I've gone and got this thing instead, and I'm going to create my own fanfare for each album, if that's okay. And that'll just save me a bit of time, and it will provide a little bit of entertainment in a video which will probably be quite boring, because it's about prog, isn't it? And prog is boring now, isn't it? But that's another video, I think. So shall we just kick straight off, and I will give you what I think are the 10 best prog albums of 1976. Shall we do it then? Right, shall we have a fanfare for that then? Right, get the Andy. This is editor Andy, who's, you know, get ready to do the titles now. There we go. It's not very loud, is it? Right. So at number 10 on my list we have Shamal by Gong.
That's not a prog album, Andy. That's more like a jazz rock album, or I would call it space jazz.
I can hear them now. The prog Nazis, right? I'm going to be dealing with this in my prognostifications series, I'll tell you, this month, but let's just ignore them. Right, so Shamal is an album by Gong. Gong came out in the late 60s, early 70s, I think around about 1970s, and they flapped around being some weird, you know, non-entity French prog band headed by the Australian who had, you know, been in the part of the Canterbury scene, original member of Soft Machine, David Allen, an absolute genius. By 1972-73, they start to heavy it up a bit, and they release a series of albums. I would say start with Camembert Electric, which are some of the greatest prog albums ever made, including the mighty Flying Teapot trilogy, which is just absolutely incredible. And what we have here is wacky, bonkers, drug-induced, psychedelic prog at the highest order, right? Then David Allen actually leaves the band. He goes off, and their drummer Pierre Morlon takes over, and by the end of 1976 we have an incredible album that I nearly wanted to put on this list, but I knew the proggers wouldn't like it, which is the Gong album Gaseous, which is one of the greatest jazz rock albums ever made. And stuck in the middle we have this, Shamal, produced by Nick Mason, and it's a halfway house between the sort of psyched out prog of the Flying Teapot trilogy and the jazz rock end with the Pierre Morlon's Gong. Now, I've always had a very strong soft spot for this album, Shamal. It's closer to the original Gong sound. It has got a lot of soloing on it, and it is very jazzy, but it's also got some vocals on there. I mean, the vocals are very trippy and out there. It's the bass player Mike Howlett who sings on I think he sings on the opening track, which is called Wingful of Eyes, which is it's probably the most hippified track ever made, actually. But within here we have loads of strange riffs and boiling improvisations, and we have some beautiful ethereal music. There's some really heavy sort of space funk on here, and I've always really loved this album. And although in some respects you could say it's not a prog album, I think there's an ambience on this that we don't have on the Pierre Morlon's Gong. There is still that Gong ambience. You can, as soon as you put this album on, you could smell the incense sticks, but I think you could probably smell the smell of marijuana much more if you were put it on. So that's what I've got at number 10 is Shamal by Gong. Thank you very much. Shall we move on? So at number 9, I've got this. Yes, Leftoverture by Kansas. I'm not a big fan of Kansas, right? Didn't want to put it on the list. I sat there thinking, I'm not putting it on. Don't want to put it on. Don't like Kansas. One of the viewers of the channel has actually sent me a copy of this album, so I now own it on CD, and I put it in the car, and yeah, I mean, I can't say much about it, really. I've only put it on because I know certain people will want it on the list. That's the truth. And that's why, so I wish I could tell you more about it. I don't like Kansas. Why don't I like Kansas? I don't know. It's like crossing the Doobie Brothers with Yes. They're incredibly competent, and they can play. They've got the incredible American harmony vocals. It's like as though it's like the Eagles had written some longer tunes and then put a bit of 7/8 in. It's that sound, and it's a sort of smooth sound, and it lacks an edge, which I like with my prog bands. Now, this album is flawless. It's incredibly well produced. The compositions are strong. The instrumentation is brilliant. In a way, when Americans do prog, they do it better than the British because they have more chops. Their American musicians are more they're more trained in a way than us British. We're much more all over the place and individualistic, you see. And I think that's what they haven't got from. I don't want to slag them off because I put them on the list here. I'm just being honest with you. There's a big epic at the end, isn't there? That's the bit. I love that. I can't remember what it's called now. Is that called Leftoverture? I'm asking you. Andy, we've come to this video for you to have your wisdom. When it comes to, I'm being honest. Anybody else would have had a quick look on Wikipedia before the video started and would be saying what they can remember about it. But I haven't done that too. I don't do that, you see. That's not my style. My style is being stupid and not knowing what I'm talking about, and there's a special sort of style which, but it's so competent. I think that's the thing. It's incredibly competent, right? It's incredibly competent. And this is a point as well. You see, prog really at this point, it should be shifted. It should have been progressing. But prog's actually stumbling, and it doesn't know how to move forward at this point. And there are solutions to it, and there's albums on here that provide the solutions. But there's also some bands that are just going through the motions and making an album which really should have come out in 1973. Okay, they're like behind the times, and I feel that's this, because what we've had happen is prog has gone from the UK, because I really think krautrock, European prog, that's completely different genre. It's not I love it. It's great, and I love it. The Italian prog is great. There's some great stuff there. And then we've got Focus, I think this album, Focus, had gone down the sort of disco funk route, hadn't they? With that album, Mother Focus, was it? The one with Philip Catherine on. Anyway, that's by the by. But at least Focus are trying. You see what I'm saying? At least they're trying to do something new and progress. Whereas what I think we got here is the Americans, when they heard the British prog bands, really couldn't quite get their heads around it. There's something about the American bands. They just can't quite get the ludicrousness and silliness that has to underpin great prog. Right? It's a very English thing. It's not even British, it's a very English thing. And so what we've got here is Kansas have formed, I think they formed in 73 at the sort of, when prog's at its peak, and then they get going. They produce their masterpiece, and it is their masterpiece in 76. And it's as though, like, yeah, we've nailed it. We've now got, I know we got Utopia, because Utopia are the same. I prefer Utopia to Kansas, but still, it just doesn't seem to have the elements that chime with me. But objectively, it's an incredible album. It's their masterpiece. I know people here will absolutely love it. That's why I put it low on the list at number 9. This is my own personal opinion kicking in here, to be honest. There's another album on here that would probably be number 1 for most progressive rock fans, and I'll put it up pretty high knowing that. Everyone thinks I try and get on people's nerves, but I'm not trying to get on your nerves. No, I'm trying to create a list where you can go, hey, that's quite good. Anyway, yeah, I feel quite. I know I don't want to upset you all. I know I come across like that, but really deep down, I want you all to like me. Right, at number 8, we've got this. I think the batteries have gone. I tested this out yesterday. It was really loud. I thought this is going to be brilliant. Right, this will be a nice. I like little props. You see, shut up. I like props. You see, in my videos. But then when I came in, I realised I'd left it on. I think the batteries are gone. Don't do that. You're not doing they'll think you're getting another album. So, L by Steve Hillage. The aforementioned Steve Hillage had also played guitar that year on Shamal. He was the guitarist in Gong. He's only on, I think he's only on a couple of tracks, even maybe just one track. He's amazed on it. I love his guitar playing. Because he was going. Steve Hillage was in a band called Khan before Gong. They did an album called Space Shanty. It's a masterpiece, prog masterpiece. Then he joined Gong, and then the second Khan album really ended up being his first solo album, which is called Fish Rising, which had come out the previous year, I think 75, 74, 75, something around there. Again, a prog masterpiece. Fish Rising is way better than L. And again, we're in transition, and I respect it, because Hillage is now going to move from being a sort of bonkers space hippie prog artist to being almost a pioneer of electronic music and drone music, and providing one of the jigsaw pieces that's going to end up in the rave scene in the UK in the late 80s, and he's going to be held as a hero, inspiring people like System 7 and The Orb. And L sits in between those two phases, a little bit like Shamal. I've always loved this album. You could tell he's tried to commercialise his sound, and so there's a couple of cover versions on here. It's All Too Much, I think the George Harrison tune, that's on here. But the sounds, it's interesting because before he had used that sort of Gong circle of musicians. Here it's basically Utopia, and so you get that American prog sound. It's just a little bit more meatier. For me, Lunar Music Suite at the end is just unbelievable. And what I like about it is it doesn't sound like Gong, and it doesn't sound like Steve Hillage. It sounds like something else. It's got its own sound to it. Of course, Lunar Music Suite was recorded under the full moon. I love this. This is what prog should be. And I think this is what we forget. that back in the 70s, prog was a bunch of drugged up hippies that were in their 20s, spending the record company the record company money on really expensive album covers by Hypnosis and going in and only recording when there's a full moon. I think it's incredible. So I've always really been a big fan of L. Great album. That's what I've got at number 8. Right, at number 7 we have this. So what's this then? Rainbow Rising by Rainbow. Now I tell you, of course, I went and had a look, on the various websites that, have lists. Prog Archives, I have to give a shout out to them there. I don't know if I could do this channel without Prog Archives. That's always my first port of call when I'm creating a list. Rainbow Rising is not on their list. You know why? Because they haven't recognised it as a prog album. Now, when you go on the Prog Archives list of the greatest albums as voted by their viewers of 1976, you've got things like Steely Dan albums on there and like Wired by Jeff Beck, which is one of my favourite albums. They're not prog albums. Even I wouldn't stretch the label prog to cover Wired by Jeff Beck, but they have. But they haven't got Rainbow Rising. Right, there's 2 albums that come out in 1976. These albums provide the future for prog. It's there, and the fact that the sort of Luddite conservatism that was there in progressive rock, even in 1976, means that the prog world did not class these as prog albums. Right, so Rainbow Rising is an album by Ritchie Blackmore. He'd whilst in Deep Purple, he'd got a bit fed up with their funky and soul-y musical goals that had merged with the addition of David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. And so he went off and made his own album, a solo album that was called Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. And it features the band Elf with Ronnie James Dio on vocals. Then in true Ritchie Blackmore style, liking the sound and liking what was going on, he decided to sack everyone except Ronnie James Dio, thus ending Elf as a band, I think. And then he went back in with an incredible band with the mighty Cozy Powell on drums, and he recorded this album, Rainbow Rising. Right, the cover, the concept and the sound is out and out progressive rock. On side 2, there's only 2 tracks. They're very long-winded, and it includes the incredible Stargazer. And for me, Stargazer, with that vision of Ritchie Blackmore, which is combining heavy rock with a sort of classical sound. We've got the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra on here, and this sort of neoclassical, almost... there's a sort of... The only way I could describe it is it's the sound of the harmonic minor, the gap scale. It's a certain sound which is going to underpin what's going to become heavy metal and then neoclassical metal. Okay, prog lives on. It lives on in a number of places. One of the main places it lives on is in heavy metal, and heavy metal just takes what prog was doing and boldly goes forward where prog wouldn't go. And by the 1980s, you've got bands like Iron Maiden and Diamond Head that are full-on progressive rock bands, but a lot heavier, but they're still progressive rock bands. And they're not ashamed to have albums called Number of the Beast and sing songs about, Vikings attacking your town or whatever these sort of sword and sorcery fantasy things. They're not ashamed to do it, whereas prog was. And so... from then on, heavy metal, which before that was sort of a blues rock style, now becomes this sort of progressive. When I mean prog, not progressive, it has the generic elements of prog in it forevermore. And now there's a preponderance of bands with very dark sort of fantasy art covers, lots of spiky writing, doing tracks that are very fast, very complex, singing about dystopian themes and wizards and stuff like that. That's heavy metal. And so anyone who said prog died, they don't know what they're talking about. And there's 2 albums on this list that really pioneer it. And this sort of harmonic minor, dark neoclassical sound really starts here with Rainbow Rising. And it's a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest albums ever made. and one of my favourite albums. I love it. The production and the sound, it's greater than any Deep Purple album. I can't tell you. It's an incredible album. Why have you got it so low? I was going to stick it really high, but I thought it's probably lacking certain aspects of prog that for some people they would go, well, that's a rock album, especially side 1, which is just rock tracks. But I think side 2, especially Stargazer, is prog. Anyway, so it's half prog, okay? Right, number 6, isn't it? Here we go. Right, so at number 6, and this band get twice on this list, which is quite impressive because it means they made 2 of the greatest prog albums of that year in a year. And this album is the album by Genesis, which is titled Wind and Wuthering. Okay. In 1974, they created their most outlandish album, if not their greatest album, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Then Peter Gabriel absconds, he buggers off, and they're left in the lurch. Phil Collins decides to take over, and they get back in the studio with Phil Collins singing, and they create one of their greatest albums of all time, right? A Trick of the Tail. Now, we haven't got to that, so anybody who's got a brain will know that that album will be on the list. They go out on tour of Trick of the Tail with Bill Bruford playing drums, Phil Collins up front singing. It's a huge success. When Trick of the Tail does really well, they go back into the studio really fired up, to create another album, and then the real cracks start to show. Not the cracks that sent Gabriel on his way. This is the real crisis, right? This is the point where Genesis changes, okay? Because once they get into the studio, Tony Banks, which for me, when you look at the how can I describe it? The trinity of poshness that existed in the very heart of Genesis. You've got highly organised and down to earth Mike Rutherford. You got Away with the Fairies, Peter Gabriel, and then you've got Tony Banks, who really believes he should be the boss of everything. Those types of posh people. Well, I should be in charge of everything, really. They just assume that they should be Prime Minister of the country. Which is strange because I've always got Tony Blair mixed up with Tony Banks. For many years I thought that Tony Blair was Tony Banks, but he wasn't. Was he? Anyway, and he wasn't, was he? I'm getting confused now. And an element of confusion always creeps in when I get to Tony Banks. As you can see, I'm flustered just trying to think of him. But I'll tell you one thing I know about him. He's bossy. And so there he was, going, I want my compositions on this track more than anybody else. And then Steve Hackett, right? Now you got to understand, in 1971, Genesis, they were crap, basically, right? Because they were too posh. They needed a bit of, working class dirt. Now, the most working class member of Genesis at this time was Steve Hackett. In he comes, and he makes the band amazing. Him and Phil Collins make the band amazing. Right? Why would they mess up this incredible thing? Because, as Trick of the Tail had proved, they were still a mighty prog band. They were at the strength with Hackett. But no, Tony Banks comes in. I want my compositions all over this album. And Steve Hackett quite reasonably says, well, I want to have mine on here. Well, okay, if I can't, can I do another solo album? He actually asked this, can I do another solo album before we do this album then, just to get my compositions out there? No, you'll have to forego your compositions, Stephen, and you will have to not have any of them on the album. So Steve Hackett then says, well, could we share it out? Say, like, if there's 4 of us, how many would there be at that point? Was there 4? We'll share it out and we'll all have 2 tracks each. No, you can't have that. This is why Tony Banks gets on my nerves. I've met Steve Hackett and he's such a lovely bloke and he was so down to earth, and the bloke's a genius. He's a prog genius. He leaves, does Voyage of the Acolyte. That's a mass. What was that? 76 now? It was 75, wasn't it? Oh God, I'm worried then. he is a prog genius, and they kick him out. And what this creates is this division between Genesis fans. There's the Genesis fans watching this video now, right? And they're the ones who like what they call the Peter Gabriel Genesis. It's not the Peter Gabriel Genesis, it's the Steve Hackett Genesis, right? And then once they get Steve Hackett out, and then there were 3, then you get the Dukes. Only 2 albums before they're doing Abacab. Because the other set of fans, they're not watching this video, right? They're the sort of American Psycho types. You know that? You know when you watch American Psycho and he loves Genesis? You know, and they sit there thinking, you know, Land of Confusion's a masterpiece. We don't. It starts here, but Wind and Wuthering is a really great album. It's their last great prog album. And what's interesting is probably the most classic track on here is probably Afterglow for me, which was always plays the medley as part of In the Cage. I love that. But it actually does sort of point forward to what they're going to be doing in the future. I just wonder what would have happened if Hackett had... I know Genesis would have moved away from the prog, but what would have happened if Hackett was there? Right? Is it Tony Banks' fault that Genesis became crap? You know, Phil Collins goes off as a solo career. I mean, this video could turn into pondering this, and I've done it before in other videos, so I find it very interesting. Genesis weren't one of the major prog bands before they became the huge multi-million selling band in the 1980s. We've elevated them up, I think, to be equal to a Yes or a Pink Floyd, but they weren't. I mean, they were selling well, but they weren't selling on that level. But it's almost like the Gabriel era Genesis has become the defining band for progressive rock. So when we go, oh, prog's not progressive anymore, it's almost because we've decided that what is progressive is Genesis and Yes. And I think when the neo-prog bands emerged, like Pendragon, Marillion, and my old band IQ, they really took their lead from the Gabriel era Genesis and almost filled that Genesis hole, because the proper Genesis were doing, you know, Illegal Alien or whatever it was. So that's what I got. Number 6 is Wind and Wuthering. Right, let's move on. So at number 5, proper masterpiece now. You ready for this one? That was almost like a fanfare then. I don't even know if you can hear these. I'm going to have to go in now and normalise these fanfares. It's going to be more work than if I'd have bloody just got, you know, a proper fanfare off Pixabay. So, yeah, interview by the incredible Gentle Giant. Right, Gentle Giant are one of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time. Right? They... have probably the most consistent run of masterpieces of any progressive rock band in the 1970s. Their first album's great, comes out in 1970, called Gentle Giant. It's really, really good. And then they really decide to push the boat out in terms of prog, becoming almost like Prog's prog band. Acquiring the taste up into Freehand and Interview, I believe, is a run of masterpieces, and it's really hard to say which one's the best one. You could just pick any of them. Three Friends, greatest, incredible. Octopus, you know, In a Glass House. They're all just masterpieces. In '76, Gentle Giant start to pull their style in a little bit. They never were ones for creating epics. I always felt In the Glass House was the closest to creating epics, where they sort of had this structure of, I think it was some really short tracks and then longer tracks. Here they're pulling it in, but it's still absolutely the Gentle Giant sound, and that sound has been refined to a point where it's literally like a Swiss watch. It sounds like a Swiss watch actually when you hear it. They're at the peak of their game. I've always felt that John Weathers was the the final cog in the machine, the cogs in cogs, that once he came in on Octopus, there's a certain groove there, and Gentle Giant were always very, very funky, even though they had that sort of Genesis sound of the English aesthetic and, will-o'-the-wisps and sprites in the forest. They've always got that, but they've also got something, there's a connection to James Brown in there, the way the parts interlock. I've always felt that Freehand and Interview, they've refined that sound. This is the most refined that Gentle Giant ever got. Freehand for me has the more memorable tunes. This one, which is a concept album, which is takes the form of them being interviewed, and it's a very strange concept album, doesn't have like one of those signature tunes. When if you start to list great Gentle Giant tunes, you might not mention anything off this album, but it's still absolutely so incredibly consistent. They just never drop the ball. It's incredible. It's probably the most perfect album on this list, I would say. And I've got it at number 5. So shall we move on to number 4 now? I have been a bit detrimental to this album, 2112 by Rush. I have stuck the boot in. Now, why do I do that? Because this is the album that made Rush. This is their 4th album. Before this, they'd done their debut album, which is like the Led Zepp rip-off known as Rush. Then Neil Peart comes in, and we get 2 really great albums, in my opinion, Fly By Night and Caress of Steel. But nobody likes it. They've got this weird mixture of sort of hard rock, almost heavy metal, and prog. Nobody wants it. Fountains of Lamnith, like the worst thing you could ever do, right? So in 1976, they go back into the studio. Prog's now dead and gone. It's faded away. And they remake this album with another sidelong epic. What's the difference? Well, before, it's all Tolkien-y, isn't it? It's all... It's will-o'-the-wisps and sprites, isn't it? Here they get dystopian. That's the genius of this album. It's 2112. They get dystopian. Now you're into the future. And you're imagining it. And for kids of a certain age, they love that. I love that. 2112 is incredible. The opening's incredible. Now, I've put the boot in because I'm not so keen on the sort of musical theatre bit where he climbs inside the cave and he finds the guitar and it's all going, what is this? It's a guitar. Oh, it's in tune. I'll sing a song even though I didn't even know what a song is. Not only do I not like that bit, but it seems to pad it out. I think if you take that bit out, you haven't got a prog epic, because really, it really is the prog sandwich. Because, of course, the prog sandwich, I used to be a progressive rock musician. The prog sandwich was in its infancy here. The prog sandwich is where you write a normal song and then you put a load of faffing about in the middle and then you go back to the normal song again at the end. That's the prog sandwich. But 2112, in terms of importance, this is the most important album on this list. And it's because of 2112. So if you get Rainbow Rising and 2112 and put them together, that's what's going to happen to prog. It's going to get heavy, right? It's going to end up with Dream Theater. It's going to end up with Iron Maiden. It's going to end up with Queensryche. It's going to end up with Mr. Bungle. It's going to end up with, Nirvana almost. The seeds of progressive rock go through a certain filter with Rainbow Rising and 2112. I'd also throw King Crimson in there with the albums that they'd done up until 1974. But of course, Crimson are not here at the moment. They're Robert Fripp's in J.G. Bennett's commune, studying the Gurdjieffian ideas. So he's out the loop. He comes back in 77, 78 and tries to go all new wave. He's out the loop. Yes, they're all off on holiday making their solo albums, right? As are ELP. There's a lot of prog bands that aren't represented on this list. Right, so that's 2112. Right, let's go to number 3. You're going to be surprised by this one, everybody. Those who know. The number 3, we've got this... Moonmadness by Camel. Right, Camel. They're a bit like Kansas. They come out in 73. Prog's over. They don't care. We'll still make some prog. We just don't care. And there's no like angst there. There's no battles between Steve Hackett and Tony Banks going on. There's no like we're going to go to the studio and make Tales of Topographic Oceans and we don't care. There's none of that. There's none of this ELP. How can we get bigger and better? And what can we blow up? I'm going to have. Give me a drum kit that you can't pick up, and all that, all that stuff, the outlandishness. Camel do all the prog stuff, but it's like English gentlemen. It's like going to an estate agents and saying to the guys, do you want to have some time off and do some prog? Yeah, that'd be quite good. Well, do you play the mellotron? Yes, I play the mellotron. Well, I play a little bit guitar. And that's what Camel are like. And there's a series of albums. Now, I've knocked them for this. I've always said that it's prog, but it's bloody insipid prog, and this is the beginning of prog by numbers. This is the beginning of seeing prog as a genre and having all the elements there. That's Camel. They start to do it. They're on the tail end of it. And then at some point I sat down and I thought, I'll have a listen to Snow Goose, and it won me over. Snow Goose won me over. I thought, this is amazing. Now, Snow Goose is amazing. Why? Because it's so English and ethereal, and it takes a story, and they use their progressive skills to embellish that story. And once you start to focus on the story, which I did. I really studied the story and the story behind that, and how the author wouldn't let them use the story, and how it really does paint a picture musically. It's a wonderful thing, and I think Snow Goose paves the way for albums like War of the Worlds and Variations by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and even bands like Sky that came out and sold millions. Another avenue of progressive rock that opens up in it, which is hugely successful, which the critics decide to ignore because they want to say prog was killed in 1977 by punk. Snow Goose is massively successful. They go back into the studio the following year, 76, and they make Moonmadness. And Moonmadness has got a little bit more balls than Snow Goose. Not that Camel have massive balls. They're not a ballsy band. The a camel could well have huge balls. They got the lump, haven't they? Some of them have two lumps, don't they? Sorry to do that to everybody. Got some of the older members of the view, they got excited doing that. I'm sorry about that. I'm going off the subject here. Now, for many people, prog fans, I think this could be their favourite album of 1976. Prog Archives put it at number one, so the viewers there had voted it great. And it's a really, really great album. The tunes are quite short, except for the real epic at the end, which is only 10 minutes long, Lunacy. This album is prog by numbers, but it's so well done. And because I love prog, when I do put it on, I like it. I don't feel the angst and tension that you feel when you put Close to the Edge on, right? They sound like they're pioneering new sounds and you feel like they're in the future, and it's like that. With this album, you don't. This is like they know what they're doing. It's safe prog, but it's very, very well done. And there's an element in the progressive rock audience that they do like everything well done. They like everything in its place, and they'll prefer this album, Moonmadness, to all the eccentric insanity of the earlier prog bands, if that makes sense. So that's what I've got at number 3. Number 2, this is going to upset some prog fans here. I know what they're like. So some of you are prepared to be upset, but I think this is one of the greatest prog band albums ever made. At number 2, we have this. I'll tell you a secret about this, right? You don't have to blow it, right? Look. I fooled you. You thought you had to blow it to make this work, didn't you? It's not that complex. There's no hole there, look. I've spoilt the fun now, haven't I? Because I'm going to blow it on number 1, and you're going, he's just acting now. I thought it was real. Now I know it's acting. It's made me, suspect the whole premise under which this video has been created by Mr. Edwards. Right, I'm going to put my hat on now. There we go. Hopefully I look a lot more British now, because I am now going to put... See, if this was just down to me, this would be number 1. But I put it at number 2 because, like I just said, I don't want to upset the prog audience, not yet. And I know they're going to be upset by this because this is an American band, isn't it? Bloody hell, this is rubbish. I'm sure my appearance on Rick Beato has been a bit like Samson having his haircut. I've had my haircut as well, but maybe it's just having an haircut that's been like Samson having his haircut. But I don't seem to have the eloquence and mental dexterity to get through these videos without going wrong. So, Return to Forever, formed by Chick Corea in 1973. They had originally, before that, Return to Forever had been sort of a Latin jazz band, nothing to do with prog, shouldn't be here. Then he is the Mahavishnu Orchestra, but because Chick Corea has got a deep interest in classical music and he composes in that style, he decides to apply a sort of intense classical compositional approach to jazz rock fusion. And on Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy, followed by No Mystery, followed by Where Have I Known You Before, followed by No Mystery, he creates this sound. Those albums on Polydor, for me, the production or the sound of them was not that great. In 1976, Return to Forever fast becoming one of the biggest fusion or prog bands in the world. They're playing arenas. They signed to Columbia. They get a decent engineer in and producer. I think it's Dennis Mackay comes in, gets this incredible sound. And Chick Corea really amps up this classical composition approach to a rock band. This band, in terms of virtuosity, is beyond anything that any prog band can muster. Stanley Clarke on bass, Al Di Meola on guitar, Lenny White on drums. And in 76, they decide to explore these sort of almost like medieval themes on this album, Romantic Warrior. This is one of the most prog albums ever made. And if people are shouting at me, this is a jazz rock album, it's because you are too genre fixated, right? This opens up with a tune called Medieval Overture, and it finishes with a tune called The Duel Between the Jester and the Tyrant. They do absolutely everything. There's great big organs coming out at you, there's all sorts of complexity and there's all sorts of themes, and it's just full on prog. Romantic Warrior, I believe, is the greatest instrumental prog album ever made. Now, if some prog singers went to take this album and add some vocals on it, I would say it would then be the greatest progressive rock album. And the reason is because Chick Corea is a musical genius, and compositionally, he can eat the idea of classical composition combined with a rock band. He could just destroy it. Yes, Genesis, ELP, Keith Emerson was the strongest in terms of a composer able to take proper classical compositional methods and apply them to a rock band. Keith Emerson was good at that, really good, as was Kerry Minneker from Gentle Giant. But compositionally, they're still not in the same league as Chick Corea. And the composition is incredible. And you feel he's completely in control. And this is a mind warp. Anybody who loves prog that hasn't got Romantic Warrior is missing out, because this is a mind warp. Now, there's a couple of bits where they get a little bit acoustic on the track Romantic Warrior. And Lenny White's composition, Sorcerer, is a little bit funky and, that. But the rest of it is full on prog, and I don't care what anybody says. Right, we're at number 1. You ready for this one then? Number 1 is, you've probably guessed it, haven't you? Trick of the Tail by Genesis. Now, I really went on about Genesis, and I've explained the scenario. This is a triumph for them. Gabriel goes, Phil Collins steps forward, I'll sing, right? And they go back into the studio, and I got to be honest, if we look at the Genesis albums, objectively, we sit back, the best sounding album they ever made was this album. The production's great. There's a thinness to their production, which I love on Nursery Crime. It's quite whimsical and homemade, that album is. Foxtrot sounds great. I always felt that Selling England by the Pound, which is for many people their favourite Genesis album, is a little bit thin in the production. Not all the way through, but some places. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is just their masterpiece, but it's not quite that whimsical English sound. Here with Trick of the Tail, they return to that, but the production's better. They've also economized their compositional approach here, and they've refined it, and they really know what they're doing. I think Peter Gabriel often threw spanners in the works, which was really good, and it came up with very strange weirdness. There's a weirdness that departs here, even though the themes, and this is still a full-on prog album, that departs here, but in a funny way, it tightens it up at the same time. And from from a competence point of view, I would say this is Genesis' greatest album. What it's lacking with is a bloke with his head inside a flower going, a flower? We never quite get that. It is whimsical. It is very English. There is all that going on, and Genesis always had that. Genesis could be as dark as Van der Graaf Generator, but they could be weird and light and strange and sort of Alice in Wonderland, and I love that. But as I mentioned, Van der Graaf Generator, they did bring an album out this year. I can't even remember what it's called. Still Life, is it? It's the one that's got that sort of electrical effect that looks like a tree on the front. Just to keep you a lot happy, that's at number 11. I've not ever even heard that album. I can't stick Van der Graaf Generator. I've spent too much of my time trying to like them. But I've said it's at number 11, okay? Has that made you happy? So, I spoke a lot about this album before. A lot about Genesis before. I've had struggled on this video. I have to admit, I've struggled on this one. Oh, it'll come back. We'll be all right. I'll do a bit of editing. Try and tighten it up. No, you won't. Well, I got to say, this didn't work, did it? Oh, but I'll finish up now. So, conclusion. 76, strange year for prog. You could still make prog albums. Prog hadn't been destroyed by punk, because punk's just emerging, and punk never really did destroy prog anyway, and I believe that punk was actually an extension of prog in a strange sort of way. But the bands themselves knew that if you've got a style of music which is about progressing in terms of becoming bigger, more complex, more conceptual, longer, they're pushing the envelope out. And in 1973, every prog band is trying to outdo themselves, whether they're doing Brain Salad Surgery, or they're doing Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, or they're doing Tales from Topographic Oceans. And once you've done that, what do? Do you go to a triple album? Do you go to a track which is about the sex life of worms? I mean, how far do you go out in prog? Right, especially when the audience, a newer generation's coming in, and they want to party a little bit. They're not quite that sort of post-Aquarian age, let's stay at home and get stoned. That changes. People want to go back out again, Here in the UK in 76, we had this very, very hot summer. And so there was lots of barbecues and picnics and lots of people going and jumping in pools and swimming, and everyone was out and about doing all sorts of things throughout the summer. And when it's like that, you don't want to sit inside listening to a song about bloody wisdom of some yogi and how he's encapsulated all of time and space that you're now going to spread out over 4 sides of vinyl. Nobody wanted that. I remember. All he wanted to do was sit outside with a hose pipe, drinking squash and hoping it would rain. But it was a lot of fun. I remember that summer. It was a great summer, 76. So there's a change going on, but it hasn't quite happened. And so when we look at this list, right, there's some incredible albums and there's some masterpieces on here. But they're coming from a strange place. We've got Moonmadness and Leftoverture. That's like this is old news. They're brilliant, but it's old news. The following year, 1977, one of the greatest bands are going to come out of the UK in terms of progressive rock band, a band called England. And they are going to make an album called Garden Shed. And it's one of the greatest prog albums ever made. But they're not going to even be able to grab any sort of success, because by then, that sort of music has gone. Okay? A lot of the prog musicians, I think, they'd got enamoured by jazz rock fusion. And so they start to move towards that. Sometimes they go full-on fusion, like Gong. They go full-on fusion. You get Brand X as an offshoot of Genesis, Phil Collins. But also, they start to pull in that sound and make records that are more dancey and more poppy. There's another aspect, which we could say track through Peter Hamel from Van der Graaf Generator, who gets rawer and dirtier and almost sort of paves the way for punk. But once punk's come in, there's a whole group of musicians that are interested in electronics and darkness and krautrock, and that really goes to pave the way for pop music of the 1980s, especially here in the UK. But also, it's interesting in my country is by 1978 we start to have these million-selling albums, which come out of the prog genre. I've mentioned them before. War of the Worlds would be one that sold 12 million copies. Variations by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Sky came out and had multi-million selling albums, one after the other. And in terms of the prog bands, Yes come back in 77 with Going for the One, and that's a big seller. Outsells any punk album. And then Pink Floyd come back with The Wall, and they make a film of this album. Genesis start having hit records. The Duke has got hit records on it, and then Phil Collins comes out with Face Value, which is still a prog album, and he becomes one of the biggest selling artists, of the 1980s. So, and then of course, the emergence of the new wave of British heavy metal is taking the aggression of punk, the basic approach of the heavy rock bands like Zeppelin and Sabbath and all that, but combining it with this sort of conceptual dystopian fantasy idea from prog. And when Iron Maiden really sublimate that successfully in 1982 on Number of the Beast, that's heavy metal defined. For me, Diamond Head had done it before with their 1980 album, which I can't remember the name of, but it's the one with Am I Evil on. So prog it's doing this. It's going out into the system, and the problem with prog was because it was very clever. It approached kids who were smoking joints to a Jethro Tull album in 1972. They'd grown up by this point, and they became the sort of conservative middle class. And because of that, they held a certain set of values, and they held on to that sound and didn't want it to change. Some of them then joined this sort of movement that happened here in the UK, which is the neo-prog movement. And this then creates this idea, I call it prog by numbers. It's been the downfall of prog, because this part of the audience are unable to, they're very anal retentive, so they have to draw a line. And in drawing a line, they go, right, that's not prog. And so prog wasn't able to take the elements and embrace it. This happens to many genres once they get past their most successful point. With prog, it happened very, very quickly. Prog starts 1970. There's a few albums you can point to, but by 1970, we've got prog. By 1973, it's over and done with. And yet here we are, 55 years later, still talking about this genre. Why? Because those albums were so incredible. I am going to be doing a series of prognostications, because I see myself personally as a progressive musician. That's how I see myself. and I'm going to be exploring this on a series of videos, and I really do want to actually, which is why I've moved my filming over to this part of my studio where the actual gubbins is, the recording gubbins, because I want to start recording stuff and playing it and exploring exactly what prog by numbers is. So that is what is going to be happening over the next few. I'm going to concentrate on prog. I'm going to leave the jazz alone a bit. And the reason is because in May, I will be going back out on tour. Yes, after saying I was never going to play prog again, I missed it. So I'm going to be doing 3 dates. That's it. Doesn't mean I'm returning to prog. I'm still a YouTuber. I'm not a drummer. I'll have to dust the old drums down and do a bit of practice. But in May, I will be going out with the band Butterfly Mind, which of course is Tim Bonus's band. Playing with some of my mates, and I hope you will come out and see us on some of those dates and say hello. I will also be trying to create a little documentary out of those 3 dates, which will be interesting and exploring it, because for me, Tim Bonus, he occupies another realm of prog where there's more latitude to do something truly progressive. I'm going to finish now. I said all the subscribing stuff at the start, so I will finish now with the little advert I've created for that tour. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.